It happened to me a year ago. Our final exams were approaching, and I still had a lot to prepare. Normally, our school library closed by 5 in the evening, but because of the exams, the school decided to extend its hours until midnight. This gave students the chance to study in peace and prepare without distractions. Since my house wasn't far from the school, I preferred studying in the quiet atmosphere of the library rather than at home. That evening, I left my house at 6 and quickly reached the library. Engrossed in my books, I lost track of time. When I finally looked up, I realized it was already 10 o'clock. I had never stayed this late before. Usually I would leave around 8, and even then, there would still be students around. But at this hour, the library was eerily silent. I had only about 15 minutes of studying left, so I decided to finish up quickly before heading home. Just as I was about to wrap up, I heard a sound, a faint dragging noise, like someone limping through the library aisles. My body stiffened, and I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a fellow student. But the library was completely empty. The sound grew closer. I hastily packed my books, my heartbeat quickening. Without looking back, I bolted out of the library. Outside, the long corridor stretched before me, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. At the end of the corridor, if you turned right, you would find the school's exit. As I rushed forward, I saw a figure standing at the very end of the hallway. It was a woman. I didn't recognize her, but something about her presence unsettled me. The closer I got, the heavier the air around me felt. My throat went dry. I wanted to call out, to ask who she was, but before I could utter a word, she vanished. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I let out a shaky breath and quickly made my way to the exit. Stepping outside, I expected to see the usual bustling street, but instead, it was strangely deserted. Normally, this road was always busy, even at night, but at this moment, there wasn't a single person in sight. A deep sense of unease settled over me. I kept my gaze low, focusing only on my steps, but then, I saw it. A shadow stretched out in front of me, long and distorted. And yet, there was no one around. Slowly, I lifted my head. A woman was walking ahead of me. Something was off. Her posture was stiff, her movements unnatural. She seemed to be struggling with every step, as if her limbs weren't functioning properly. Her clothes were tattered and stained, and her tangled hair obscured most of her face. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn around. But I was so close to home, I just needed to get past her. Gathering my courage, I quickened my pace, hoping to overtake her. Then, she stopped, and slowly she turned her head towards me. Her face was unlike anything I had ever seen, her mouth twisted into an unnatural grin, her eyes dark and hollow. She tilted her head and whispered in a raspy voice, "Have you seen my daughter?" I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. Desperately, I pointed towards the distant street, hoping to make her leave. She stared for a long moment. Then, without another word, she limped in the direction I had pointed. I stood frozen, watching her disappear into the darkness. Then from far away, her voice echoed through the empty street. "She is here." That was the last thing I remembered. When I woke up, I was in my house. My neighbor had found me unconscious on the street and had carried me home. My body was ass cold, and a deep exhaustion weighed me down. Later, I learned the truth. In 1998, a woman named Agatha had lost her 10-year-old daughter in a tragic accident. Her daughter had attended my school, Eden Hill. Overwhelmed by grief, Agatha searched endlessly for her child, unable to accept the loss. And even in death, she had never stopped looking. To this day, there are those who claim to see her wandering near the school, whispering the same question, "Have you seen my daughter?" And if you ever hear that voice. Weeks passed, but the terror of that night never left me. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that it had been my imagination, deep down, I knew the truth. I had encountered something beyond the realm of the living. I avoided staying late at school after that. Even the thought of walking past the library sent chills down my spine. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, Agatha's voice would return to me in my dreams. That haunting whisper over and over, "She is here." One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel, my best friend. "Dude, are you awake? Something crazy just happened. Meet me outside." My heart skipped a beat. Daniel had never been the superstitious type, but his message carried an urgency that unsettled me. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I slipped on my jacket and stepped outside. The night was eerily quiet, the wind rustling through the trees. Daniel was waiting at the corner of the street, his face pale. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated before speaking. "I was walking back from my cousin's place when I saw something." He swallowed hard. "A woman. She was just standing there, right outside the school gates. At first I thought she was just a random person, but then..." He took a deep breath. "She turned to me and she asked, 'Have you seen my daughter?' A wave of nausea rolled over me. I could barely breathe. 'Daniel,' I whispered, 'did you answer her?' His silence was deafening. I grabbed his shoulders. 'Did you answer her, Daniel?' His eyes met mine, filled with fear. I pointed toward the main road, and she walked away. Ice ran through my veins. She had done the same thing with me. Before I could say another word, a sharp sound echoed through the empty street, a shrill, agonizing scream. "She is here!" The voice rang out from the school gates, carried by the wind. But this time, it was closer. Daniel and I ran. We didn't stop until we were inside my house, bolting the door shut behind us. We stood there panting, drenched in sweat. For the first time I realized Agatha wasn't looking for just anyone. She was looking for us. And she wasn't done yet. But my story doesn't end there. A week after that horrifying night, I was still shaken. Every shadow, every whisper of the wind sent chills down my spine. I had convinced myself that I would never see her again, until one night. I was in my room, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it, a faint knocking at my window. My room was on the second floor. With trembling hands, I turned my head towards the window. My curtains were drawn, but I could see a shadow behind them on your hair. Then, through the silence, a familiar voice came. "Have you seen my daughter?"